Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Beneath the Waves with myself, Matt Silver, and Dave Hughes. Good evening, Dave.
Hi, Matt. Hi, everyone.
We also have Dr. Danish Mishra on with us this evening. Danish has a whole host of talents, skills, and experiences, from working in Formula One to being a rocket scientist. Danish has a whole plethora of experience that brings his expertise in network analysis to tonight's show, and we can't wait to explore the expertise that he's going to share with us from the settings that he's experienced both in his research and in his practice. So we're really looking forward to that this evening.
Thank you, Matt. That's very kind of you.
So let me, as usual, do a quick reminder of last week. So we had a very different week last week. It was Matt talking about his story, what has shaped him, his beliefs and his values, his story, how he got into education, and his belief in what children can achieve if given autonomy and a caring and supportive environment. And also the story of Shaftesbury High School and what he and his team have achieved, and the journey they're on. And it really is an amazing story. So if you didn't hear it, I really encourage you to go and listen to the recording. It was a fantastic story.
Thank you very much, Dave. And it's actually, I'm in Shaftesbury High School today. I've spent the day attempting to become a doctor as Danish is. So writing up my thesis and using the bank holiday to its maximum effect. So you may notice there's a different setting for tonight's show. But let's move on to Danish. So obviously from our own experience as a school, we've really experienced the impact that network can have, both going out and also inside of the school. But also we can look at that from a leadership level, but also from a student and engagement level. So Danish, your own experience is both in network analysis, but also in your lecturing. Do you want to expand on just what network analysis is and how you see that?
So networks, at a very fundamental level, they are just about relationships that we have. That's the currency in any network. Network is a group of people having some sort of relationships. I say a group of people, you can substitute people for, cells, organizations, even train stations. The way train stations are designed and the railway structures are built is using networks. So network of people is essentially a group of people who share some relationships between them. And that's what network is. Network analysis is just a way for us, a language to understand how this group is interacting, right? How they are sharing practices among themselves, and how they go about achieving their goals or their performance or whatever it may be that interests us. So that's the long and short of it, essentially. It's just about relationships between people. And network analysis is a way for us to understand how those relationships help people operate in these networks.
I mean, my experience is how people work in networks is vital to getting things done in this complex and uncertain world we live in. I mean, gone are the days of hierarchical organizations where everything flowed up and down the hierarchy: information, instructions, energy, development, knowledge. I mean, today, that's not how the world works, is it? I mean, I look at my wife. My wife's an artist. She connects with people all over the world, people she's never even met. And that's where she gets her ideas, her inspiration, her energy. My daughter was a digital marketeer, and she had clients all over the world and a network of other digital marketeers who all had different expertise, and they just drew on each other. So, the world we're in today is very different to how it used to be. So is that experience as well?
Yes, it's interesting that you said that. It's to bringing back to some of the stuff that Matt was mentioning around my lecturing experience. This all brings it together. It's networks, essentially. These relationships allow you to do three things which you can't do as an individual. It allows you to access your tacit knowledge, your tacit capacity. So by tacit, I mean your ability or capacity around something which but it's difficult to make it explicit or communicate. Think about, I assume all of you can ride a bike. If I ask you to describe how you ride a bicycle, it's a lot more difficult. It's, you will go around, well, you try to sit on the thing and try to make sure you got your balance right. That's about it, right? And that's the tacit element. You know more than you do, right? So that's the tacit knowledge. It also helped what Dave was saying, his wife's ability to connect with other people. It helps you to exaggerate your expertise and capability by accessing other people's expertise and capability. Right? And that's where innovation is. That's where exciting ideas come from. Because you look at it into research, and I'm sure all of you have observed it up to an extent in your life as well. The real competitive advantage that organizations have, or even in cases of individuals, it's not so much in their inherent capability, or in an organization's case, in their knowledge base, in their patents. It's in the people, right? It's in those relationships, because the ideas that you get out by bringing a group of people together with different expertise is inevitably more interesting, more exciting than what a person can come up with on their own. I'll just give you one brief example to illustrate the point, and because we have teachers in this webinar, they would appreciate it. I used to run this class when I used to lecture, this particular exercise to demonstrate effect of networks. I will give students a problem, say, how to bring carbon emission to 0 in Britain by 2050. And I've got 50 students. These are all MSCs, mature people with some work experience. These are all clever students. And I've set them a problem, and they have 5 minutes to write 3 things that come at the top of their head. And they write it on a Post-it note, and then I would ask them, keep it in your pocket. And then I will divide them in groups of 5. And I'll say, now discuss how you're going to solve the same problem, but in a group setting, and arrive at a consensus and write those 3 points. And then they will do that in a group. And at the end of the exercise, I'll say, put all the group Post-it notes on the left wall and the individuals on the right. And inevitably, the ideas they came up with in those groups, in that network setting, with everyone pulling on different expertise, were exponentially better than what they came up with on their own.
So that raises a really interesting question around ego there, doesn't it? How willing are we as leaders to really throw the problem out to people and sort of vulnerably say that we're not necessarily the one with all of the answers?
Yeah, and that's very interesting that you use that word. I mean, in network analysis and graph theory, you quite literally have something called ego network, where essentially you have a person at the center, and these sort of spokes are going out, connecting them to other people. And as you said, that's not a very efficient network. That's not a very efficient way for anyone to operate, because what you're essentially saying is people can come and access my skill because I'm fountain of all the knowledge in this world. And you're not accessing their skills. And this is the point, you started talking about leaders, that you need to sort of just, keep that in mind. This is the point where you transition from a learner's network, which is what's happening in classroom, students making, their small groups, their friend circles, accessing each other's capabilities, to a sort of a leadership or an organizational context, where what network is providing you is quite a bit different than what happens in a learning environment. Here, you're not trying to absorb information or knowledge, but access expertise, right? We talked about competitive advantage. You're trying to find that, if you're having a certain challenge, and if you have an ego network, i.e. everybody comes to you instead of you going out and connecting with different people, you will sit on your own with that problem. But if you have a wide network, you have different diverse connections, you are able to access different people's expertise and, leverage their ability to find a solution.
I think you have me running through the skills that both we need to teach our students and our leaders as well. There.
Absolutely.
So how would you then advise a head teacher in a school of looking at how well he or she is networked and how well that their team is networked? you talked about network analysis. How do you analyze a network?
Yeah, and very good question again. So so let me answer.
Hello.
Relationship, but that's not a very good way to do it. The standard practice is, especially in the business context, in the leadership context, is to send out surveys with a certain number of questions. So say I send out a survey to everyone who's attending this webinar with 3 questions. Out of everyone who attended, whom did you go for information, whom did you go for energy, and whom do you go to for new ideas, right? And say Dave nominated Matt for information, but Dave nominated Danish for new ideas. So both networks. Now I have those relationships, and if I'm nominating Dave in return for new ideas, I have a stronger bi-directional relationship. Right? So you start building up network that way, and then you run a whole host of mathematical metrics. You do some fairly clever mathematics, even if I say so myself, to figure out and quantify those relationships. And that creates a network diagram, which tells you where people are placed, how they are placed to leverage other person's capability, and who are your key players in this network. So that's how you actually build a network and do the analysis. In terms of my advice to head teachers and staff members, again, distinguishing between the 2 aspects, the learners network and the organizational and the leadership network, I will, on the learners front, I will do what I have experienced to be working in my, my lecturing career, which is allowing those natural networks in groups to form in the class, because peer-to-peer learning is always more effective than you sort of standing in front of the classroom and just being the source of knowledge, and it's a one-way flow. So give them less so that they can learn more. Engage their curiosity. Yeah. And then they can figure it out. Of course, you are there to help. If they run into something they can't solve on their own, you're always there to help. At a leadership level, I think it's everyone in the group has to make a conscious decision that, by sharing my expertise, by sharing my capabilities and abilities with the group, I'm not sort of giving up any competitive advantage. I am exaggerating my capabilities. Because it's never about what you know, but whom you know. Because it's impossible to know everything. As you were saying, Dave, it's just, there's so much out there, a sheer amount of information and practices. For you to know everything is absolutely impossible. But by knowing the network and knowing other people with capabilities and having those exchanges, right? It could be on a forum like this, a fortnight exchange, a monthly exchange, a meeting where the group comes together and keeps in touch, and there is exchange of information. That goes a long way in building relationships and making those relationships stronger over a long period of time.
What I really like, because, I would tend to think of, have I got a good relationship with Matt? Yes. So I've got a net, Matt is in my network. But what I like is you're saying, well, actually, it's not just about I have a good relationship with Matt. What does Matt bring to me, and what do I bring to Matt? Yeah. And it might be different things, and I go to different people for different things. That whole concept of that's where I get my knowledge and information from. That's where I get my energy and inspiration from. Yeah. That's where I get idea. If I'm in a creative slump and I want to bounce some ideas around, that's the person I go to. But having those distinct people for different things I need to do, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, there is certainly a transactional element. I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely spot on that what I bring to the table and what the other person brings to the table. So that's a major component. But there's also as you said, having that good relationship also is quite important, because, a lot of time, I keep coming back to this tacit knowledge, this tacit capability, primarily because I wrote my PhD on this. So I feel quite passionate about this. There is a lot of information and knowledge within our head, which we ourselves are not very aware of. You know, Karl Popper very famously said, "We know more than we know." And those things come out in the informal conversations, in the sort of, you know, skunk works environment. You know, there's this group in organization where all the people meet and they don't talk about work. They just do cool things, quote unquote cool things. They experiment, they try different things. Or, you know, anyone who's ever worked in sales will tell you, and I don't need to tell you, Dave and Matt, that most of the sales and interesting conversations happen during lunch or dinner rather than in the boardroom, because that's a more relaxed environment and you're trying to build a relationship. And you end up sharing things, you end up saying things, and the other person goes, "Oh, that's very interesting. I've got this project. Can you do something about it?" So absolutely, both components are quite important.
And I think that's an important point you mentioned about the informal. So how as a leadership team, you know, particularly at the moment, are you informally interacting both within your team, but also with the rest of your staff informally, as much as you may have to have those formal meetings as well? Am I picking up that that's quite a key thing to maintaining that relationship?
Yeah, because that's where you move from the transactional element to relationship element, the quality of relationship, right? It's just not about the transaction. Both elements are equally important. So you have to find the right balance, right? So Matt needs to join a forum where it could be a formal conference. It could be a, you know, a learners conference, whatever it may be. But at the same time, he needs to go out and have some, you know, some time at the pub for lunch with his friends or with his network, so that they make those informal relationships stronger. Because a lot of ideas that we have sometimes sound cuckoo to us. We think, that's mad. That couldn't possibly work. But if you have those informal relationships, you're more willing to share those ideas. And that goes, and once you share it, someone's like, "That's not mad at all. We can actually make it work." So building that trust.
So how do we bring that network analysis into schools, Danish? What does that look like? Because obviously this is something that's used as your own experience around, you know, Formula One teams for really elite performance. Now, from a more sort of holistic pastoral perspective, maybe schools don't see themselves necessarily in quite the same category as a Formula One team in that way.
Yeah.
So how do we bring this into schools to make us more effective, and what could some of those benefits be to ourselves as leaders?
Yeah. I mean, like any good tool, it's context dependent. So if you, the way I would do it, and I ended up doing a similar exercise for a MOOC that we used to run at University of Bath around sustainability and spread of cancer in cells, human cells. And what we ended up doing, because there the idea was very specific, we are trying to identify how learning happens, right? It's not about performance. It's about learning, how individuals are learning. So, and when we were looking at those networks of relationships, we found out that it wasn't the student who was most proactive in engaging with the online environment in the MOOC. It was the student who, after the course, posted a comment on the thread explaining a particular topic or asking a particular question. And when someone replied to it, they engaged them. And that's how the relationships built up over the time. So we've ended up finding these 3 students out of more than 3,000 who are at the core of driving learning in that environment. And we found out everyone who was connected to those 3 students had a much higher chance of scoring high and actually getting a certificate out of that MOOC than otherwise. So when you thinking about bringing it in classroom, you don't need to send a survey out. You don't need to do a complicated exercise. We know as lecturers and teachers how networks are forming and who's the key node. We have that intuition. So the way to do it, the first thing, you know, which all of us can do is start by encouraging that network learning, that group learning, right? And sort of just stepping out of it. And once we start seeing the results, that's when we start making it more formal, start actually doing network analysis, sending out surveys, and trying to put a more of a structure around that.
So if you were talking about an academy with a number of schools and you're overseeing those schools,
Absolutely.
that kind of broader scale really provides more of that intuition that you can't necessarily have on a face-to-face level.
Absolutely. And when it comes to head teachers and the staff members, I think for that, you can definitely do a more formal network analysis exercise where you get an academy with, say, 5 schools. You send a survey out to the head teachers, to all the staff members, and you start figuring out who are the people, who are these teachers to whom everyone else turns to for a particular thing. Right? You ask, who's the person you turn to for understanding new ideas or developing new practice or designing new curriculum, designing your syllabus, right? And then you start finding these people in the system whom you didn't know about, who these hidden stars that people turn to, but they were just completely invisible to formal hierarchy, because that's what happens in organizations when we do this.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily the pioneers of change. It can be, but it's not necessarily the pioneers that take the crowd with them, right?
Yeah, it's actually often not the pioneers. It's often someone who's, I don't want to say inevitably, but who's more often than not someone you didn't think about, because they are very quiet, they have strong relationships, they don't feel like they need to come on the public fora because they know people will email them or give them a call later on during the recess, or call them during the weekend, or they will meet up later to discuss these ideas.
It can be a lot of reflection.
Yeah.
Think and take into my own practice.
Yeah, if I give just one quick example to illustrate this point, and I'll close at that. We did this with a major US organization, one of the biggest organizations in the world. Out of 4,000 people, the most influential, the most well-connected person was a person who was just 2 years into the job, right? And was at the bottom of the organizational hierarchy. And when we showed the results to the C-suite, everybody goes, who is that? I didn't know they work for, and why are they above me in this list of influential people? Mm-hmm. And that's the power of the network. The person who manages the relationship, manages the transactional as well as the quality aspect, they are the ones who drive the network.
Fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Dave, do you have any particular questions there? We're going to open up for questions in a second, so please do post on the chat or on the Q&A if you want to ask any questions of Danish. But Dave, do you have any sort of follow-up questions that are really sitting on the surface there for yourself?
Yeah, well, maybe just say a bit, and I've seen some of this myself, but what are the key insights that typically that doing a piece of organizational analysis would bring?
The key things that you find out is, the first thing you find out is the structural hole in your organization or in your network. So by structural hole, I mean lack of connectivity, where you thought, oh, I'm very well connected with my entire staff. And then you find out nobody in your staff turns to you for finding out about new ideas, understanding new practices, or even for collaboration. And that could be a bit of a rude awakening, but that's the purpose of this exercise. Just making you understand that formal relationships do not make a network. Networks are a slightly different thing. They are not about your formal structural relationships. These are about relationships beyond what an organizational hierarchy imposes on the organization or a school or a group. So that's the first thing, the structural holes. And the second thing that you often find out is the hidden talent. You end up finding people who are very quiet, who do not have much of a public profile in the organization or in the group, but they have such strong relationships that people are always turning to them for finding out solutions and finding out how to go about implementing a new initiative, how about learning new practices, developing new training regimes. So those are the two things that we often see around structural holes, i.e. lack of relationships and the hidden talent. And then you also spot who is most likely to leave the network. In organizations, it takes the form of attrition, the talent leaving the company. But in a group, you can tell, well, we think that person is not really interested in being part of this organization anymore. Mm. So those are like the three key things that we spot again and again.
And I guess you can also see where the silos are in organization. Are different groups talking to each other, or are they very much separate and not connected?
Yeah, silos they stand out. When you're looking at those structural holes, they often determine where the silos are. And that again is Dave, I know you have a background in supply chain. It's incredible. Every time we show this to supply chain leaders, it's like, why are procurement people not talking to us? So it's because people often tend to substitute technology or online forms for a relationship. And that inevitably leads to inefficiency and a suboptimal way of working.
So what's that balance like? I mean, what's the commitment of time that is required for quality of relationship to be considered quality?
That's a very good question. And I'm going to give an academic answer to it. It depends. But it depends on the work level you're talking about. So if it's a C-suite level, it's quite a different. There, they do need to make a conscious decision to invest a lot more time in relationship building. But if you are a factory floor manager, and at that point, your relationship with procurement manager probably doesn't involve that much of time commitment as much as making sure you have points to touch on, i.e., you have a regular contact, regular briefing every 15 days or whatever, so that you have a relationship where you can supply information and they can understand what you need.
So I think that almost comes down to where your analysis comes to the advantage, because you can really tell who you need to give that time commitment to and who you might not.
So if, in your context, Matt, I would think at head teacher level, it's quite critical that there is a lot of investment in relationships with your staff as well as with other head teachers, because in a managerial, in a leadership role, that's where you can make the biggest difference. But at a staff level, I think having regular touch points is a lot better than trying to continuously focus on, because then that comes at the cost of your actual day-to-day operations or day-to-day teaching.
So scaffolding that into your week and designing that into your week is really important. So we actually run a 3-tier system in the school where we have collaboration vertically across each key stage.
Wow.
And then because of that collaboration time, it means that everyone has a chance to collaborate and work together on whatever it is that they're designing. But we've grouped the responsibilities of the school. So our core subjects sit in Key Stage 3, our projects sit in Key Stage 4, and our sixth form curriculum sits in Key Stage 5. But what that allows to do is much more focus and collaboration across those subjects, which are actually happening really organically now. So actually I have much less touch-in points with staff because they're actually running those groups a lot more autonomously. And then what we're looking at actually introducing next year is also looking at the vertical lines. So how, say, for example, one of our core subjects, such as English, links with our projects subject, which is performing arts, which links with a sixth form subject, which might be music, say. So because there's that familiarity of line the whole way through, we have almost a three-way mesh going in each direction, which allows a voice then, no matter what the subject, it allows a voice from each key stage, each subject, each level of authority or power, or in the hierarchy. So essentially, everyone's got a voice everywhere.
And that's exactly the purpose of networks, because you have built up a matrix, and to navigate matrix, right? 3 verticals and 3 horizontals. You have those relationships you can jump to in any direction rather than go linearly, where it makes it, inefficient.
Yeah. Super. Okay. I'm really conscious of time. Sorry, we're sort of slightly overruled the Q&A session. We'll obviously carry on and have a Q&A here this evening. But Danish, thank you so much for your time this evening. Dave, thank you as always. It's been an excellent show on Beneath the Waves. I feel like I've learned so much myself and taken a lot from it. So I can imagine how our attendees are feeling. So thank you very much for joining us this week, and we look forward to seeing you on next week's Beneath the Waves.
Thank you, Dennis,
for having me.
Bye,
Okay.
everyone.